You see, my little baby girl grew up into a toddler so fast, she's already climbing out of her crib. That's when it hit me. She's ready for a big girl bed. And so I started searching online for kids' bed. But guess what? Some of these beds cost over 1,000 US dollars. And honestly, it didn't sit right with me. So I took on the challenge to build her a kids' Montessori bed for less. And not just a little less, but way less. In fact, I built the bed for under 70 US dollars. And so in this video, I'm going to show you how I pulled it off. And trust me, it is not as easy as it sounds. Let's get started. To keep the project as budget friendly as possible, I started off by searching Facebook Marketplace for free lumber. And lucky me, I found a listing for a few pieces of lumber that could work. But as it turned out, it wasn't quite enough for the full project. So I headed down to Home Depot to pick up extra pieces of lumber for the build. When buying construction lumber for building any furniture, it's important to take the time to select the best lumber, avoiding lumber that is completely warped, twisted or bowed, as well as lumber that is covered up in knots. Once I picked up the set of lumber that I felt was best for my project, I brought it to my garage to allow it to acclimate to the temperature in the garage before starting the build. For the hardware, I turned to Amazon. It's just so convenient to have whatever you need delivered right to your door. And a few dollars later, I had everything I needed to start the build. But before heading down the garage to start the build, I took some time to plan everything digitally. Using Blender, I created a 3D model for the bed. This helped me visualize the design, figure out the dimensions so that everything fits together nicely. And with my plan in hand, it was time to head over to the garage to start the build. I got a bunch of free lumber from a nice lady in Ohio, and I've got all of them sitting right there. So what I'm going to do right now is just bring them one after the other to this space, take them apart, and see how much yield we have. How much can we actually use to build this bed? All right, let's go. I'm done taking the wood apart, and this is what we have. This is very exciting, actually. I didn't think I would have this much lumber to build from, so I'm very excited to have this much. Okay, well, I guess it's time to build now. This is the plan that I'm going to be using to build this bed. So what I'm going to do is just follow the plan. First step, I'm just going to break down the lumber, figure out a way to, construct the whole thing. And I'm going to take you guys every step along the way. So let's see how this goes. I start by measuring and marking the lumber to break it down to length. Since I have a build plan, it's typically safer to cut the lumber to its final dimension from the start. Oh, and before I forget, I will share a breakdown of the total cost of this project at the end of the video. Next, I break the lumber down on the miter station. My new BT stop block was the hero of the show. If you are looking to build one for your miter station, I will link my build video in the description section below. I just finished breaking down the lumber. And as you can see, I have the long components right here, and I have the rest of the other components sitting over there. Unfortunately, I don't have enough lumber to cut off my components, so it looks like I will have to make a run to Home Depot once again. That is why you always have to buy extra lumber, people. You always have to buy extra lumber. I then jumped into my truck and drove down to the nearest Home Depot to pick up some lumber. After that, I returned to the garage to proceed with breaking down the rest of the lumber. Next, I set my table saw fence to 1.5 inch because that's the width for all the pieces that we are going to be working with in this project. With all the parts cut to their final length, I went ahead and ripped them down to a final width of 1.5 inches. Before ripping lumber, it's always best practice to raise your table saw blade to the appropriate height for safety. In this case, I used a 2x4 to determine the height. Then without wasting any time, I started ripping the 2x4s into the appropriate width for this project. So I have the components cut right now and they are all laid out here nicely just so I can keep track of what is what. Almost all of them are cut except for some two components which I'm waiting till I get to that part of the assembly before I cut, just because I want to make sure everything is as precise as possible. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put this stuff together using some dowels. So yep, dowels. Next, I marked the lumber using a spacer block to ensure the balusters were evenly spaced. After laying out the drilling spots, I used my dowel max jig to create the necessary holes for assembling the front, back, and sides of the bed. So I have gone ahead to drill all the holes for the joinery, and so I'm pretty excited about that. I have to admit, that was a lot of drilling that I did. An insane amount of drilling. Honestly, I've never done any project that required this much drilling. Anyways, that's behind me now. I'm done with that. And so what I'm going to do next is give the pieces some good sanding, and then I'm going to round off the edges to avoid splintering my little daughter. I put on my mask and started making some fine dust. Before assembling the major sections of the bed, I took the balusters and rails to my makeshift router jig to round off their sharp edges. I have gone ahead to actually assemble the front and the back side of the bed. I did it off camera. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to go ahead and actually show you guys how I actually assembled the sides. The process is exactly the same. Nothing is different. Let's do it. Now, it was time for the long-awaited glue-up session. When using dowels as the main joining method, I found it easier to first pour a moderate amount of glue into the drilled holes on the ends of the balusters. Then insert the dowels. Next, I applied glue to the drilled holes in the top and bottom rails. I installed the balusters into the bottom rail first, then carefully worked my way to attach the top rail, moving from one end to the other. A non-invasive mallet is a must for this process. Trust me, you will really need one. All right, to lay out this joinery, we're going to mark on this stock. This stock is 1.5 inches, and I'm just going to mark 1/2 inch on one side and another 1/2 inch on the opposite side. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is just line up the other piece that we are going to be attaching to this piece here. Yeah, just line it up, make sure everything is like flush. Okay, once everything is flush, what I'm going to do is just transfer the markings onto this piece. So I'll just transfer it right here, transfer the markings to this one. Okay, now that the markings has been transferred, next I'm just going to try and mark all around this particular stock. Next is just mark the face where you want to drill. For that, I just want to actually drill on this side, the top line, halfway through the stock. So that would be like 3/4. So here, actually let me just flip it around. Just right here. Yep, so this is it. We just laid it out. Once the drill spots are marked, I clamp the poles to the ends of the left, right, front, and back parts of the bed, making sure the parts are properly secured to your workbench. Then carefully drill into both parts with the right drill bit, which is a 5/16 diameter spade bit in my case. Then use 11mm bit to enlarge the 5/16 hole at either ends of the left, right, front, and back parts. The bit side might be different for you depending on the size of the threaded insert you use. I would say 5/16 is a little big for the size of the rails and balusters that we are using, but it works. I would recommend a 1/4 diameter bolt and a 1/4 threaded insert for this project. Alright, so I have installed all the threaded inserts, and so I'm pretty much excited about that. I did have some few problems here and there, but I figured out an efficient way to actually install this stuff. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put all the parts together, attach the sides, the front and back to the poles, and see how the bed looks so far. Alright, let's do it. Attaching the front, back, left and right part was both exciting and nerve-wracking. It was the first real test to see if all dimensions in my 3D model checked out. The first assembly went together quite well. There were only minor hiccups, but overall everything went together very well and I'm very pleased with the results. The next thing that I'm going to do is just cut some common rafters, and so yeah, this is the first time I'm going to do that. I'm excited to do that, so let's see how that turns out. For the rafters, simply mark a 45-degree line on the face of the wood. Then measure 29/16 from the line you just made, then mark another 45 degrees just like I'm doing in this video. Make sure both marking lines are parallel to each other. Next, make the required cuts on all 4 parts. But before joining 2 pieces to make a rafter, let me explain how we are going to cut the bird mounts. Okay, so we are going to cut a seat, and to do that we should measure 5/8 inches. All right, from the top. So imagine this is the top of the rafter. We are going to measure 5/8, which will be about here. Just 1/2. Yep, plus 1/8. Okay. So once we have that, we take this line on the square here to realign it with this edge. Okay, make sure the line follows all the way to this side. We're aligning this line here with this edge. So we just lined it up, and then we just move it all the way to that point where we want to line things up. So where the 5/8 mark. So once we are there, we just make a line, and we are going to cut the spot. Now that we know where to cut, simply go ahead and use whatever method you deem appropriate to make the cut. I simply use the miter saw to make the cut. I would admit that there is definitely a much more comfortable and safer way of making the cut than what I'm showing here. To assemble the rafters, I joined the pieces at their mitered edges using glue and dowel, ensuring the angle between them was precisely 90 degrees. Next, we attached the connecting poles between the 2 rafters. Here, I simply used the same techniques as before. I clamped the parts together and then drew the required hole, followed by the installation of the threaded inserts. I then installed the rafters onto the vertical poles using some screws and added the final horizontal pole that connects the rafters. Alright guys, so we are almost getting to the end of the build. As you can see, I have assembled the entire bed. Everything has been assembled. I even have the slats over here cut. that will go to the bottom part because we want to make sure that the bed doesn't lie on the floor, just touching on the floor. So I have some slats cut for that. Now, before I finish this build though, I need to make sure that I round off the edges of these parts. They are pretty sharp and they are not rounded off yet. I did round this part off, but I left this part unrounded because I wanted to make sure that my measurements were as accurate as much as possible. And now with all the parts assembled and complete, I can now go ahead and actually finish this part off by rounding off the edges so that they are actually nice to the touch. As of now, they are pretty rough. After that, I'll just give some of these parts some sanding and then apply some finish, and that will be the end of the build. I rounded off all the horizontal and vertical poles to make them smooth and comfortable to the touch. To finish the build, I gave the parts a final sanding, applied shellac to all the surfaces and installed a door on the bed frame. And just like that, the project was complete. Before revealing the bed to my daughter, here is the cost breakdown for the project. It cost me $29.72 for the lumber, $6.84 for the threaded insert, $19.54 for the bolt, $3.49 for the hinges, and $5 for the door lock, bringing us to a total cost of $64.60. Now for the moment we've all been waiting for. What was the birthday girl's reaction? She absolutely loved it. Amongst all the gifts she's received from friends and family, this was by far her favorite. Her very own bed made by her dad. And that's the end of this story. If you enjoyed this content, consider subscribing so you don't miss out on future projects. Until next time, bye for now.
Yeah. Okay. Good.